Hi, everybody. So, without much ado, we'll launch into this. Um, all your novels are like very set in specific cultures, right? So, and explore how that influences, well, family dynamics as well. So, do you want to start with your novel, Pierceland?
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. It's amazing to be in Kerala for the very first time. My mother came here in the 1990s and she always told me that Kerala was amazing, so it's good to be here at last. Round of applause for yourselves. So, my novel Fierceland is set in Malaysian Borneo, where my father comes from, and it's about logging and oil palm corruption. And it's about a family navigating the ghosts of the past and inheritances. A literal inheritance from a palm oil baron to his children, but also the kind of trope or archetype of the sins of the father and violence and complicity being passed from the parent to the child. But then, on a broader context, it's about how in these kind of post-colonial nations, we inherit corruption, we inherit modes of being and acting. And I wanted to drill down into the tectonics of how our cultures are connected, whether it be Australia, that had its own genocide of Aboriginal people and dispossession, whether it be North Borneo, where the British North Borneo Trade Company exploited and extracted from the land, whether it be India or Nigeria, where I also talk about in my novel. So place is very important, but also how places are connected.
And your book deals with the family secret, which you bring out into the open. All these novels have secrets. So in your specific context, in the context of Spain, please.
Hello, now you can hear me now. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure for me to be here. Thank you for coming. I'm loving Kerala so far. And well, as you asked me, yeah, the novel is about a family secret. It wasn't really a secret because my grandfather was kidnapped and murdered by a nationalist terrorist group that is based in the Basque country. That it was called ETA. It no longer exists anymore. And what happened actually was all over the news at the time in the late 70s, but I was born at the beginning of the 80s, 6 years later. So I had always lived this story as if it was some kind of fiction that my dad told me. My dad used to tell me many stories, and I thought that the murder of my grandfather was another of those stories, and I couldn't accept it as something that really had happened. And so for me, this book, I try to acknowledge that murder was real and that it had had a real effect in the family. And the only way that I had was to look at the press, because although my dad would tell some things, they were like some random phrases and some stories that wasn't the complete story. So I had to go to the archives and look for the news, and then with fiction fill up the holes, no, to make my own story. And this all happened after my mother died, because when a death in the family happens, it kind of revives all the deaths past in the family. So that was the situation.
Okay, talking about deaths, even your book begins with the death of Apachan, right? And then goes into this woman's world and her family and their secrets. So,
Yeah, so എല്ലാവർക്കും namaskaram. So it's wonderful to be here in Kerala. Thanks. So this story, The Remnants of Rebellion, is set in Kerala. It is very much tied to the land and the stories of the land. So like Gabriela's novel as well, mine is is inspired by a real life incident from my grandfather's life when he was the superintendent of a rubber estate in Kerala in the late 1960s. So, this was the time, you would all know the history and the politics of the time. This was the time when the Naxalbari movement was peaking in West Bengal. But because of the strong communist presence in Kerala, it percolated down to the state and there was an armed rebellion, which was crushed eventually. But during this time, there were strikes at the estate where my grandfather worked, and the assistant superintendent was stabbed to death. So this story has been in our family for a very long time. And I was a journalist. I quit my job to write this story. So I have fictionalized this account, but I've also given it a present day perspective through the eyes of the granddaughter. So one follows the life of the grandfather, Isho, in the 1960s, and the other timeline follows his granddaughter, Eliama, which talks about the present day politics. So it's both.
Um, your novel is like very, it uses, there's this song, the Song of the Wood. And I found that really fascinating. I mean, it was translated into different languages, which you present in the book along with the English translation. Do you want to talk about that? It's quite fascinating.
Sure, yeah. In my novel, one of the main characters is actually the rainforest itself that speaks. And I was kind of speaking back to writers like Joseph Conrad, who wrote about Borneo, but also obviously wrote about Africa in Heart of Darkness, and often used the forest and the wilderness as a kind of impressionistic backdrop to the characters' lives, but also as a metaphor for the dark heart of man. But in a place like Borneo, it has a different resonance. It is the repository of our spirit, our spirituality, our stories. It's a place of great fecundity and generosity. And in my mind, the forest it's not just an inert thing to be extracted and exploited as it is in the logging trade that's allied with deep corruption, but it is a place of great generosity and vengeance and playfulness and violence, and I wanted to give that a voice. But I didn't want it just to be my own concept of the voice. So what I did with my wife, who's an amazing musician, is we went into the rainforest and she inserted highly sensitive microphones into a 1,000-year-old, 100-meter tall dipterocarp tree and recorded the sound of the sap moving within the body of the tree. And it sounds like a combination of waves crashing on a beach combined with a human heart. And so we took the spectral analysis of that and used that as the artwork for a section where I translate the poem or a poem into 16 of the indigenous languages of Borneo, of Eastern Borneo. So in this way, one of the main themes of the book is erasure, but in opposition to erasure and silence, we can use amplification of voices that have been silenced or quieted, especially indigenous languages that are often erased when confronted with the Death Star of homogeneous hegemonic languages like English or Malay. And so that was what I was trying to do in that section, was for an English-speaking readership, whether they're in Australia, London, or Kuala Lumpur, they're reading this book in English, and then suddenly, out of the blue, it just drops into 20 pages of indigenous languages that they have to contend with, that they have to look at, that they have to recognize, that they have to learn the names of, see the shape of, and recognize that they are still alive. So that's what I was trying to do there.
Okay. When you were talking about the death of your mother and your grandfather, and how, especially your mother's passing, how did you write about it? Because it must have been very affecting.
Well, when my mother died, I was 29 years old, so it was a long time ago. And I thought it was my first experience with death, and that it was something like new and big for me. But actually, when I started writing during my grief about what had happened, I realized that I had been surrounded by death all my life, no, because all this presence of the murder of my grandfather, and also because my father worked for many years, and he still does as a journalist in the Basque Country. So he was also an objective of these terrorist groups, no, because terrorist groups don't want nobody to have a different opinion to theirs. So that was an amazing presence over us. It was like a shadow that covered us, but I was so used to it that I couldn't even see it. No, so as I it's the same exercise actually that I do with acknowledging the death of my grandfather. Uh, I'm like acting like a public notary to to bring to my reality what has been hidden. No, that death, that murder, that presence of death that I couldn't even see it, although being completely around me. Yeah, and the death of my mother was what opened this crack, no? What gave the space to to confront it. For example, we were so used to repress our emotions in our family that for the first time when my mother died, it was the first time that we shared like a pain together, no? Because we had to be all put together because nothing was happening in theory, no, but everything was happening around. So yeah, that's maybe why the book is sometimes very, I don't know how you say the right word in English, but it's not like an explosion of emotions. It's like more condensed. Yeah, because it was actually like that in real life too.
So did you really have to struggle to write about it?
Well, I completely did. It was very hard. For example, I've had a very happy childhood and very happy life. It's not that I'm, but when I wrote this book, suddenly I started having all these panic attacks that I didn't know where they came from, and many people have asked me if this book has healed me, and it actually didn't. And it's been after I finished the dinner guest, this book, I've been for almost a decade, which I almost have it now, but writing another book to try to get rid of it. Because it was like, I think I kind of called some ghosts that were hidden there. And after I published this book, I had to go around the world talking this story. I had like a complete crash of identity, like who is this person talking about this? Because this was a secret. I could have never identified with this story, and suddenly I was publicly known by this story, and that this was a completely mess in my head for me. And it's not that I suffered because I didn't, but I think as a writer, you have to kind of know who you are to write a book, or at least what you have to offer as an author is your point of view of the world. So if you're kind of lost of where you stand, it's difficult to write a story, especially a story that has to deal with who you are. So it's taken me a while, but I now can think that it's kind of healed. But in the way I have to deal with so many ghosts, now the grandfather, the town, the family, and it's been, now I see it as a fun experience, but because what I've done is I've played with all these ghosts. What's good with language is that you own the story. And when you are a victim, like in the case of my family, you know, when somebody wants to kill you, you lose your voice, and you don't own the story. Like the person who wants to kill you, the murderer, is the one who owns the story and who writes what comes next. But what I want to do is like turn it around and be able to play with all this.
Okay, Elizabeth, I was struck by how you set it very much in the social context, and especially that scene where Roy, the protagonist's boyfriend comes in, and there's that whole moral policing going on at that chaya kada, and this is so familiar to people in India generally, and of course in Kerala. So do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so there is one, you're talking about this particular scene where, so Eliamma lives in a fictional town called Pudalur, which is based on a real place, but I didn't want to name the real place. So it is a village. We say we are a very progressive society, but we still have remnants of our old world thinking, even in a progressive society. So she's a runner in the story. She's an artist, but she runs. So she wears her tank top and her short shorts every day and goes for a run. And there are people who are watching her. They don't say anything. Violence can be not just physical, but an intrusion of your space as well, through stares, through that male gaze as well. So she gets that every day, and she's almost numb to them. And there is one incident where her boyfriend and her sit in a chaya kada, tea shop, and they get very handsy. And a group of people come and tell them, we're going to, it's obscenity. Public displays of affection is mounts to obscenity. And there's even a law for that, right? So I have seen this. I have seen this in my life. I grew up in Kochi, along the backwaters, and on Marine Drive, couples used to come and sit in the evening. And obviously, they would have no other place to go and sit down and, share a lime juice. And they would sit with umbrellas. They would hug. And there were, I'm sure you know of the many incidents where political parties come and try to catch them and try to shoo them away, even hit them with slippers and sticks. So we say we are a progressive society, but I've seen this growing up. I don't know how it is now. But again, it's not all the people. It is those factions who want to use some ideas to propagate their version of truth for their own interest. So I have seen this sort of moral policing around me while growing up, and that eventually made its way into the book as well.
Actually, Saharu Nusaiba Kannanari had written this book, and his whole book is on this moral policing, on this. So, I made that connection as well, and really interesting. But Omar, what I found about your book is that the brother and the sister have two very distinct voices. And I really want to know how you did that.
I think it was through a lot of painful trial and error, 10 years of dead ends and experimentation and banging my head against the wall and anxiety attacks and living and loving and grieving and all sorts of things. I think it's also through a deep process of listening. I come from a spoken word and hip hop background, so we're always called to speak and perform. And sometimes you are taught that the sound of your own voice is important, and you sort of learn to love the sound of your own voice, and you forget when to shut the fuck up and just like listen, And I think the listening process is the most important one when it comes to finding voice. And so I think I had a deep imposter syndrome within my soul when it came to this book, because I was born and raised in Australia, as you can probably hear, away from my homeland, Borneo. And this was the first time I was going to be writing about Borneo in depth with the particular voices and slang and musicality of the characters. And so it sort of froze me and paralyzed me for a long time. But then at a certain point, I realized that I would let that imposter syndrome fuel me to read deeper, travel further, listen deeper to the voices, especially the slang, and also to know the limits of my own knowledge and to have the humility to really ask people to be harsh in their critiques, my readers. And so it was quite difficult, actually, to write the voices of the characters, especially of all different genders and backgrounds and ages. But it was, you know, Michael Ondaatje talks about writing a novel, and he says that it's about laying layers of patina over and over and over again until it shines with a great depth. And that's, I guess, what I was trying to do with the voices. The book you might read is the 20th draft of this book over 10 years. And so, you know, it was just a process of kind of making sure by the end that they were different enough and that they had their own distinct voices, including the voice of the forest. Sorry for rambling too long, but it's a deep question.
Okay. Okay, and Gabriela, talking about the imposter syndrome, I came across an interview where you spoke about feeling like an imposter.
Well, I don't know if an imposter. I felt a huge responsibility because I was telling a story of someone like with my mother. I felt less imposter, but with my grandfather, as I haven't met him, I felt kind of an imposter talking about him being around still many people who had known him. And why would I tell a story that would remain as the story of the family? You know what? Why am I entitled to do that? No, like that. This is entitlement question came to me over and over, and I sometimes felt a lot of guilt more than imposter syndrome. I think I felt certain guilt and responsibility, but well, it was like a survival thing. Like either I wrote that story or I would go completely crazy. So I'm more calm with all this now. Yeah, I think I had no other choice. So, but imposter syndrome. Well, it's my. I think the book is what it is. It is my first book. I hadn't written anything before. The book became a success, but I have no control over that. So when you don't put, like, I have nothing to do with if the book goes well or bad. So I don't feel so much as an imposter that way.
Okay. Now, Elizabeth, you know, maybe it's just me, but as a reader, the bits of the book that I found really hard to read were about the dogs. You know, really sad about both the dogs in the book. So, do you want to talk about that? Because I'm sure it comes from a place of great feeling. That's what I felt when I read it.
So there are two dogs in my book. One dog's name is Duke. The other's dog's name is Cutlet. And I can't give away too much as well, but I don't know how, but I'll try to talk about it without actually talking about it. So Duke is actually a real dog. My grandfather had a dog called Duke, and he was an Alsatian mongrel. And so he used to walk with my grandfather through the estate, and everyone was petrified of him because he looked like a wolf, but he was only a dog who just looked like a wolf. So Duke is inspired by the real dog, Duke. And something happens to Duke, but you'll have to read to know what happens. And the other dog is Cutlet. Cutlet is a representation of all those dogs that I have seen families abandoning. I know people in my family who've had dogs, and then sometimes they wouldn't want to deal with them anymore. So they would just take them in the car, and drive somewhere in the middle of nowhere, open the door, let the dog out, and drive. That really happens. I've heard so many stories of this, and it used to it scarred me a lot, these stories, because I have a dog now and I can't imagine doing that to my little Shih Tzu. So this particular thing happens in the story. So a lot of the things that are in the story are from real life. I mean, fiction is truth, right? So that's what I've done. So the dogs are real.
Okay, great. So, we'll, ask for questions. Anybody wants questions, please feel free.
When you talk about the music in the book,
Yeah.
are you talking about an audio book, or are you talking about descriptions?
I'm talking about the style of the book. I mean, all prose has its own musicality, but for the voice of the forest, in trying to capture that, I almost wanted to get some sort of stream of consciousness, free flow, jazz, improvised kind of cascade to embody the richness of what I imagined the forest's voice would be like, because it's so dense. You know, like that's one of the things when you go to the jungle. Sometimes the impression's given by colonial writers that it's quite silent and eerie, but it's not true. The forest, the jungle, because of its biodiversity, is as loud as a steam engine. But when you replace it with a monocrop like palm oil, it becomes silent because it doesn't have that biodiversity. So I wanted to capture that type of raucous musicality. And then when I'm talking about the slang, North Borneo people speak in a very particular way that's different even from people in the mainland and Kuala Lumpur. And I wanted to kind of get that. And so I think I mean also the musicality of everyday speech. I'm always looking for that as well.
Hi, Omar. Omar, your idea about having that voice within the sap, that voice, it's very mystical to hear. I would like to know what made your wife think about this idea of recording the, supersonic sound of this sap falling. It's very mystical and interesting to know.
Yeah, it was amazing. I didn't know about this before. She has these highly sensitive microphones that are not like these microphones that record the vibration of the air. It's sort of like a long metal needle, and you can insert it into the ground or into a tree. And so she had done a big project where she traveled the entire length of the border wall between Mexico and the USA and had recorded the vibrations and the sound of the wall, of this extremely highly charged kind of political intervention in the landscape, and had created a whole album, which she actually put out last week. Check it out, Sunder by Mariel Roberts Musa, and recorded the resonance of this wall and what it was saying. So I think her mind, what she was thinking was similar to me, was allowing the physical world to speak back to the human world, as opposed to us projecting our ideas or forcing our ideas onto it. And I think that's kind of, so when she told me about this and she said, I could record the sound of the sap within the tree, I actually couldn't believe it because, as you say, it sounded like magical or something. And then when we finally got the recording, then it sounded like this big beating heart. It gave me shivers,
Hi, this question is for Gabriela. So, your description of the book is very visual. So I could just see, how maybe your family was feeling through the years. And you mentioned that there was like this unspoken need to look normal, and it all came out when your mother passed away. So I wanted to ask you that when you wrote the book, did you speak to your family members and, talk to them and ask them how they were feeling? And after the book came out, what was their reaction to your book?
Well, thank you for the question. I didn't tell anybody. I did it completely silent in my room without telling anybody because I knew that if I told, they wouldn't have let me write it. And as I told you before, it was very important for me to finish this story. And after what I did do is after I finished it and before it got published, I shared it with my immediate family, with my father and my sisters, because well in the book they appear but very little, my sisters. I want them to read it because sometimes you never know what would make people upset, because I thought that some passages they will really find them horrible and they said nothing about them, and very little details suddenly were the ones that will make them mad. Or my sisters would say, well, this didn't happen exactly that way. And I was like, well, that's how I remember. But memory is how it is. I mean, memory is not the truth. It's also fiction. So I was changing many things also to make the story work. The reaction was very different. No, there were three different reactions. One of my little sister is a poet. She loved it. My dad said, "What? Why are you writing this? We didn't suffer." That's what he said, and which I found incredible. But then he was very emotional for many days, and now he's very proud. But at the beginning, he was really mad, and my other sister felt a bit exposed. No, and they are all legitimate feelings, and yeah. I think it's a pain to have a writer in the family, especially if they write about the family.
Hello. Yeah, thanks for this session. I felt that, I mean, in all of you threes, you're exploring like two major themes like memories and identities. So I'm thinking that, I mean, in current day and age, most of our collective memories are being altered by narratives, different kinds of narratives. So how do you think that affects the identities as well?
Sorry, was the question that that memories are being filtered through the voices of different narrators?
No, he's saying memories are being changed by the predominant narratives, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The collective memories are being altered by a narrative. So how it affects the identities, our identity?
It's a deep question.
Yeah, that's we need to chew on that, I think. But I think I get what you're trying to say about the growing narratives that are used for a particular purpose, at least in our country. The nationalization of different things, the politicization of different things. Um, so I actually think all sorts of narratives should exist. We can't just say, no, this narrative I'm not going to accept. It might be uncomfortable. I probably, as a liberal, I might find some narrative uncomfortable, but that's okay. That's a narrative. As long as that narrative is not used to bring other people down, I think it's fine. Well, it should not bring other people down. Then that is physical violence, that's mental torture. That is what I think we should avoid. So the book does deal with that. The book is, my book talks about memories of people and actually changing narratives. It does deal with that. So in the 1960s, we saw the rise of communism and left politics of the left. And in this day and age, we can see the rise of right-wing politics, even in Kerala. I think we're all aware of that. So their narratives have changed. It will keep changing. But I think as readers, as humans, we have to understand that these are changing narratives, and we have to think critically and see where it's all leading. And I have dealt with these things in the book as well.
Yeah, I agree with this. It's a great question. Yeah, I needed a moment to chew on that. The way we tell stories matters, and oftentimes the stories that are told by politicians and those people in power are used to demonize and dehumanize segments of the population, which then allows acts of great injustice to occur against them. I mean, we see this with the genocide in Gaza. Certain narratives that are perpetuated that allow the horrors to unfold against a people in front of the world. But in my own country, Australia, we've almost become famous for the cruel treatment of refugees, of desperate people trying to come to Australia to build a new life. And the stories that are told about these people affect the way they are treated in a real life way. So I can give you a small example, right? When gov-speak or bureaucratic language is weaponized against human beings, You know, originally they would call these people refugees coming to Australia, refugees, somebody fleeing something, somebody in danger. But I remember in the mid 2000s, under a conservative government, they started calling them irregular maritime arrivals. So it completely saps the humanity out of a human being and allows horrible things to occur to them. So, in the face of this overwhelming horror, a horror that is related to language, I think that's what's so important about coming up with new forms of poetry and fiction and ways of expressing ourselves to build a bridge so we don't just stay in ideological silos separate from one another.
Okay, so then it's been a pleasure talking to the three of you. Thank you so much. And thank you for being a great audience.